Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to be doing a review of Black Widow. Now, I watched this a couple days ago with Weaponized Nerd Rage, and we kind of both came to the same conclusion on it, but I'll kind of go through that as we go through the review of this. Now, there will be spoilers in here. Um, just because you can't really talk about the movie without getting into a lot of the spoilers, and there's a lot of points in this movie that really need a lot more explanation than what the movie gives, and I'm going to try and give that so people can kind of get a good idea of what they're looking at. So the movie, as expected, stars Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow. This is the character's solo outing that probably should have come out in 2014 as opposed to now. It also co-stars Laurence Pugh, I believe I am pronouncing that correctly, David Harbour, and Rachel Weisz. And here, the main problem with this movie is there's a very strange sort of shift that they do in this movie at a point where it goes from being like, okay, this is kind of like a spy thriller thing, to going into full-on stupidity and referencing real-life events and stuff that absolutely makes no sense. But the opening scene of this movie is actually pretty good. We kind of get a little bit of a background on something involving Scarlett Johansson and Laurence Pugh's character, who's Laurence Pugh is supposed to be another Black Widow, as well as Rachel Weisz. They're all supposed to be members of the Black Widow or the Red Room, which has been referenced in other movies. And then David Harbour is kind of like a Russian Captain America known as Red Guardian, and they do wind up giving him kind of a Captain America knockoff type of suit later on. I don't know how close it is in reality to like the comic book one, but it looks like they kind of just did like a copy paste thing more or less with the Captain America suit, except they had to tailor it a little bit differently to fit David Harbour since his character's kind of fat. Um, but regardless, the whole early part of this is trying to set up like, okay, Black Widow's on the run. This is supposed to take place immediately after Captain America: Civil War. Like immediately, I mean, like within the week. So now you have that whole situation that has just happened. So she's on her own, and she gives General Ross the slip, which William Hurt's in this movie for maybe like 3 minutes. Um, and again, it's just he just reads some stupid cookie cutter lines. Which, by the way, his character in Civil War, when he came back for that was just stupid. The stuff that he says to like Tony Stark. So I don't really give a shit about his character. He's kind of crappy. Um, but then you go into this whole, the whole plot line involving the main plot of the movie and the main villain, which is Taskmaster. Now, I will say this ahead of time, is that they reference the Budapest incident, which, again, everybody I think they mentioned that they were going to explain that or something in the promotional stuff for this, but basically the Budapest incident was it was a joke that was made by Joss Whedon in Avengers, where there was this little kind of back and forth in the New York battle between Hawkeye and Black Widow, and they mentioned, oh, this is like Budapest all over again. And that's literally what they based this movie on. They based it on a single line of dialogue from a previous movie. And the problem is that Disney has done this before. They did this with Solo, where they took the line from A New Hope, where Han Solo is describing how the Millennium Falcon made the Kessel Run in a measurement of distance as opposed to time, which they then had to explain because nobody just chalked it up to the fact that George Lucas was just tossing in science gobbledygook. So that's basically what they did with this movie. Is they took that line and they extended that into a movie to try and explain it. And, well, I shouldn't say an entire movie because there is another movie here. There is a hashtag #MeToo movie here, and it is very, very obvious by the end of it. But the whole Taskmaster plotline weaves into that, and I'm not going to get into too much of what that entails. But basically, it just means the Taskmaster has a connection to Black Widow. And they don't explain it until the very end of the movie, and also Taskmaster herself, which, by the way, yes, that is a thing, She is not. She's not a good villain. She's literally just they copy and pasted Winter Soldier actually for a lot of these scenes. They copy and pasted scenes from Captain America, the Winter Soldier, where there's and even Captain America Civil War too, where there's a scene uh, probably about 15, 20 minutes into the movie, where Scarlett Johansson is driving this car in this rural area, and she pulls onto this bridge, and she winds up getting blown up, which she should have been dead. That crash was horrible. She doesn't even come out with a scratch. That's another thing I'll have to get into with this is the effects with this movie. But she gets into the crash, and it's almost an identical scene to when Winter Soldier took out Tony Stark's parents. When you see the video of that in Civil War, it's almost to a T, except Scarlett Johansson doesn't get shot in the face because we still have another hour of the movie left. But it's copy paste, and literally Taskmaster just comes in to fuck up their day, and that's it. But the difference is that you don't have this really complex, interesting storyline around Taskmaster because you didn't have his character in a previous movie like Bucky Barnes. So it literally a faceless, well, I shouldn't, pretty much nameless except for the name Taskmaster. A faceless, speechless, badass super soldier comes in and just fucks up their day every once in a while, and that's it. And it's literally a plot MacGuffin where, okay, we need to have this character come in right now. Which, by the way, this movie is full of plot MacGuffins. The plot MacGuffins of this movie are stupid as fuck. But the other thing that I kind of noticed too is that it looks like they modeled the Taskmaster suit in this after the armor from the Crisis video games, because it looks almost to a T exactly the same, except for the hood and stuff. Now, the fight choreography was very good. I will say that. They were able to copy a lot of the moves from previous Marvel characters because the Taskmaster's whole thing is he's supposed to be able to copy other people's fighting skills and moves and stuff so he can mimic them. And in this case, I mean, they show Captain America, they show a few other things, they show, he does some other Black Widows type of stuff. So they did a good job in that, especially the Captain America moves with trying to choreograph the fighting styles, which I liked, but at the same time, there's no substance to give those scenes weight or meaning. And then you have the whole relationship between all four of these people, because basically the whole idea of it is that this is supposed to be Black Widow's extended family. Now, from the trailers, you would assume that means brothers in arms, that type of thing. In reality, no, at the beginning of the movie, they have a flashback sequence, which, by the way, flashbacks are a common thing in this movie, and most of them do not need to be there. There's a flashback at the beginning of the movie where it shows that they went undercover in 1995 Ohio. David Harbour, Rachel Weisz, Laurence Pugh, and Scarlett Johansson as a family. So Scarlett Johansson and Laurence Pugh were the two daughters. David Harbour was the husband. Rachel Weisz was the wife. And they were supposed to be undercover for the then Russian government because, again, for whatever reason, they decided to forget the fact that the USSR no longer exists. Because it seems very, very strange the way that they kind of set up the shadowy organization in this, because they already did the whole thing with Hydra. They did the whole, and again, this feels like a very, very much a copy paste from Captain America: Winter Soldier to this movie. And the comparisons between this movie and Winter Soldier are so numerous, except the only thing that this movie does that's stupider is they introduce this plot MacGuffin, and they introduce this actually at the beginning of the movie, and it's never really entirely explained, is this red mist or red liquid that once it's exposed to air, it turns into a gas. And that red compound, if inhaled by somebody who has had brainwashing, not a specific kind of brainwashing, mind you, but just brainwashing, then that red liquid will entirely cure their brainwashing. And this substance existed in this universe right after the whole Bucky Barnes situation in Civil War. Why the fuck couldn't you just... Why wouldn't you just use that on Bucky Barnes? Like, why couldn't you just have that in like it totally erases the need for a character arc from Bucky, because Bucky can just go back to what he was during World War II, where he doesn't have any internal programming and shit. And then there's also no reason for Wakanda to distrust him by putting like a fail-safe device in his arm, which I think that was a plot during Falcon and Winter Soldier. But anyway, current Marvel loves fucking retconning old Marvel. But the problem is that it not only does it open a shit ton of plot holes in other movies, it makes absolutely no sense, because they don't. It would be one thing different if it was like a chemical compound, or like they did something to them, like a medical procedure. Which, by the way, we're gonna get to the hysterectomy stuff, which is fucking weird. We're gonna. If there was something that was curable, like if it was a type of control that was curable, then it would make sense. If it was like a compound or something, it was specific to that form of brainwashing. But they don't specify that. They just say any brainwashing. It's like, oh, it just cures it, which makes absolutely no sense. David Harbour is the best part of this movie. And it's unfortunate that he keeps getting stuck with crappy superhero movies. Somebody please give him a good superhero movie to be in. Because he, at the beginning of the movie, when they do the flashback sequence, he's actually pretty serious in what he's doing. But then later on, once you meet him again in like present day, quote unquote, he just chews scenery. Like there's a scene where he's trying to have like a heart-to-heart with Laurence Pugh, like a father-daughter type of thing, and he starts talking about how his hands almost got frostbitten, and then in order to stop them from becoming frostbitten, his father had to urinate all over his hands. And it's a dumb story, and it's told in an over-the-top, stupid way, and it's hilarious, but it's like the so bad that it's good type of dumb. And that's the other thing in this movie too. It does the Marvel humor thing where it's joke and then instant payoff. You know, they do that like 3 or 4 times throughout the movie, and the problem is like it feels like the scene construction in this movie was off. Like the idea of like, okay, the scene should go 1, 2, 3, so all the elements of the scene are there, but instead of doing it 1, 2, 3, you did it 3, 1, 2 or something like that, where the scene feels like the dialogue order should be switched, and it's not like it feels like that way in editing. The scene itself just feels like that way. Like somebody wrote a scene that was all, jumbled and out of place, and the timing for those jokes could have been much better spread out. So there's a lot going on with that type of a thing in this movie too. As for the acting, I mean, Scarlet Johansson is just there collecting a paycheck, basically. She doesn't provide much emotion in her acting in this. She's definitely not bringing her A game for this one. Laurence Pugh is, again, just somebody that looks like they're bored to be there. Rachel Weisz and David Harbour actually have some kind of good chemistry on screen, and since they're both veteran actors, they kind of... Actually, I don't know if David Harbour could technically be considered that, but regardless, they're both well-seasoned actors, even though the 2 leads are as well, and they don't do as good a job. Those 2 are very convincing as, like... The one convincing aspect about the acting in this movie is that everybody acts like a dysfunctional family. Because mom and dad are like, there was a funny, it was actually funny. It was actually written in a funny way, just because it very much mirrored what you would picture in like a family dining room with like a weird European family. Is like mom and dad are talking about banging, and the 2 kids are like gross. That's kind of a funny little thing in there. That's probably the only semi-enjoyable part of the movie is the dining room scene there. But then, again, it is ruined by the climax, and the climax of this movie is where it commits most of its sins. Because here's the thing, is the climax of this movie has so many things that either don't need to be there or have absolutely no explanation, that it doesn't matter. That it's like, why are you throwing all this shit at us in the 3rd act? That none of it was set up. The fact that the Russians apparently have a makeshift helicarrier that nobody knows about, that's like stuck in a cloud or something like that. Again, they do the thing like with Winter Soldier, where at the end of Winter Soldier they crash the helicarrier into the shield building. Same exact thing here. The helicarrier comes down and just like lands and explodes, which it kind of it is the headquarters, and it also is a shitty Russian helicarrier. Now the other thing is that this is where all these flashbacks come in, because the whole thing is they get captured at Rachel Weisz's house, and then they get brought aboard this helicarrier. And it's assumed that Rachel Weisz betrayed them, but in reality, it was Scarlett Johansson working with her, and there was this whole plan, and there's a bunch of stuff, and they do 3 separate flashbacks. One to explain how Scarlett Johansson breaks Russian Harvey Weinstein's mind control, and I'm not exaggerating on that, it is literally Russian Harvey Weinstein. And then you have the flashback to explain why they only have one set of earpiece communicators. And then there's also a third flashback, and I can't remember exactly what that one specifically explained. I think it may have explained the whole, like, tricking them angle where Rachel Weisz and Scarlett Johansson switch places and stuff. Now, this whole helicarrier thing is also the home base for the quote-unquote Red Room, which is run by this Russian Harvey Weinstein. Now, I am not. You could look up pictures of this man and then compare him to Harvey Weinstein. It was deliberately done to cast a similar-looking actor and make them look similar to them. The only difference is this guy has a little bit more hair and he wears glasses. Outside of that, it's the exact same thing, and he speaks with a Russian accent. And that's Scarlett Johansson's enemy in this movie. And I think that may have also come from her initially, because in interviews before this movie came out, like a while ago, like 2017, when it first started being talked about and entering into development, Scarlett Johansson basically put out there that she wanted to make this a movie that was about, or maybe it was 2018, but a movie that was centered around the idea of honoring the Me Too movement, which is probably why you have Russian Harvey Weinstein. And the problem is that whenever stuff like that usually happens, is you have a very large initial surge initially when everything starts coming out and it's a huge news story and stuff like that. But then after like 6 months, most people don't even pay attention to it unless they're being dragged back into it or they're directly involved in some way, shape, or form, or they're one of the people that endlessly support it. So, and that goes for anything. It doesn't just go for the Me Too movement. But the whole thing is that then you had the coronavirus, then you had the George Floyd and all this other stuff that's happened in the last just year or two alone. Nobody fucking remembers that shit. Nobody. In recent memory, if this film maybe had come out in like 2019 or 2020, if 2020 wasn't a complete shit show, then maybe you could have gotten away with that angle. But now everybody says like, oh, that's just Harvey Weinstein. Oh, I remember that. It's not one of those things that's like that. If somebody watches this movie like 25 years from now, nobody's gonna fucking get any of it, and it's gonna make even less sense. And then the last thing that is probably one of the dumbest things in the movie that makes absolutely no sense is that Harvey Weinstein controls the Black Widows via pheromones. So the pheromones that he specifically gives off, and this is fucked up, he specifically gives off prevent them from harming him. So if they're within smell distance of Harvey Weinstein, then they can't hurt him. Their bodies won't let them. And apparently the only way to thwart this is to smash your face into a desk in order to sever a nerve ending somewhere in the front of your face that connects sensory perception in your nose to your brain and negates his little pheromone control thing. There are so many questions involved in that one plot point, but the main one that I have is, she has been punched in the face how many times, and you're telling me that thing hasn't been severed already? Because it doesn't look like it takes much. She literally just smashes her face into the desk once, and it's done, and then she can hurt him. So it makes absolutely no sense. And then the other thing, too, is at the end of the movie, they crash the helicarrier and all that, and then David Harbour, Rachel Weisz, Laurence Pugh, and Taskmaster, the surviving Black Widows, they all kind of scatter, and Natasha says, oh, I'll take care of all the, there's a bunch of government vehicles and everything that's kind of rushing in, like black SUVs and Humvees and shit, and then it just cuts away, and you don't find out what happens in that scene. and she wasn't captured because she wound up with Captain America at the beginning of Infinity War, which, by the way, they do a time jump right after that, just so we have an explanation for why she's blonde. Then we go into the post credit stuff, and I don't care if I'm going to ruin the post credit scene. I already did the spoiler warning. In the post credit scene, it shows Laurence Pugh at Natasha's grave, where she's leaving flowers, and then Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character from Falcon and Winter Soldier shows up to set up the Hawkeye series by saying that Clint Barton was the one that killed Natasha Romanoff during the events of Avengers Endgame. So now it's setting up that Laurence Pugh is going to be the main antagonist for the Hawkeye series. And this is the other thing that I hate about this shit, is that if you're going to do television and Disney Plus stuff, that's fine. If you're going to do movies, that's fine. But the stinger in the movie should not lead into a television show that most people probably aren't going to fucking watch. So, stingers for movies should stay in movies. Stingers for shows should stay in shows. Don't intermingle them. Look, if a character is going to show up in a movie later on, set up a little bit of something here. Okay, I get it. You know, like, okay, we're going to go off and then they're going to somehow wind up there or whatever. But I hate that, because the end stingers were one of the best things about the early MCU, because you got to see something kind of cool about the next movie. And in this situation, it's really just, it's a television show that we already know what's going to happen, and it was really not necessary because Hawkeye had a complete character arc by the end of Endgame, so it's kind of stupid. But regardless, this whole movie was a fucking train wreck. I've gone into a majority of the stuff that's wrong with it, but there's also a lot of other shit that's wrong with it just from various standpoints. Oh, sorry, the effects, too. The effects were kind of corny, especially the fact that, Laurence Pugh can stand over an airplane turbine and blow it up and apparently not take any kind of explosion damage to her body, like not even a scratch. So yeah, there definitely needed to be a lot of other things done with this. The script is terrible. The writing on it is terrible. A lot of the dialogue is, again, underperformed by a lot of the actors because a lot of people, I think, were just here for a paycheck. But I want to know what you guys think. Personally, I would give this movie like a 3 to a 4, maybe, and that's mostly just for production value. Other than that, I wouldn't really say it's very good. If you're a Marvel freak, you're going to watch it anyway, so there's no point. If you're not a Marvel freak, I'd say give it a hard pass. It's not even really necessary. All it does is just overly complicate things and set up a television series. So, like I said, if you want to watch it, that's all up to you, but I want to know what your thoughts are, so put those in the comments below. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?